Elias Rourke was a retired Navy SEAL living alone in the quiet town of Pine Harbor, long after his marriage had fallen apart. He spent his days in silence, helping the poor, fixing homes for the elderly, and caring for people who had less than he did. Then
We'd
Caleb
really
Mercer,
like you to
the
be there.
volunteer captain, handed him an
I
invitation
appreciate the
to a
thought,
fundraiser
but
for retired working
I'm not
K9s.
sure.
He was
One
more than
photo
just a
stopped
dog,
Elias
you know.
cold. An old
He was
German
family.
shepherd with a silver muzzle, a
20
torn
tours
ear,
together,
and eyes he had
and
never
now he's
forgotten.
gone.
When Elias arrived at the adoption event, he realized he had almost no chance of bringing Ranger home because he did not have much money. So he stood up and asked for one final goodbye, stepped close to Ranger, and touched 2 fingers to his chest without saying the dog's name. Watch until the end, and if this story touches your heart, please like, comment, and subscribe. The old K9 Rehabilitation Center stood on the edge of Pine Harbor like a chapel built for forgotten warriors. It was not a military auction, not officially. No government flags hung above the stage. No officer in uniform called out numbers with a hard voice. The event had been arranged by a private rehabilitation center that took in retired working dogs, military dogs, police dogs, search and rescue dogs, and security dogs whose bodies had grown too tired for service, but whose hearts still waited for orders. Outside, late autumn wind rolled across the fields, shaking the last brown leaves from the maple trees. Inside the long timber building, the air smelled of wet coats, sawdust, coffee, and old leather leashes. Rows of folding chairs faced a low platform where each dog would be introduced to families, former handlers, local donors, and a few sharply dressed men from private security companies. Some people came carrying hope. Others came carrying checkbooks. Harold Pike, the man coordinating the event, stood near the front with a clipboard pressed against his chest. Harold was 61, tall but slightly bent at the shoulders, with silver hair combed neatly back and pale blue eyes that had seen too many working dogs reach the end of their usefulness in the eyes of men. His hands were large, dry, and nicked from years of handling kennels, ropes, and frightened animals. He had the careful voice of a man who believed rules mattered, but mercy mattered too. Remember, Harold told the crowd, his voice steady through the microphone, these dogs are not equipment. They are not trophies. Every adoption will be reviewed. Every home must be suitable. A few people nodded. A few did not. Along the right wall, clean kennels held the retired dogs. Some lay quietly on thick blankets. Some sat upright, back straight, ears forward, as if waiting for a command that would never come. One old bloodhound blinked through cloudy eyes. A black Labrador with a silver muzzle rested his chin on his paws. A German shepherd with stiff hips rose when someone passed, trying to stand tall though age pulled at his bones. There was dignity in them. There was sorrow, too. They had spent their lives finding bombs, locating missing children, chasing danger, guarding strangers, and walking into places humans feared to enter. Now they waited beneath soft lights while people decided whether their final years would be warm. Near the rear row, one kennel remained covered by a gray canvas sheet. A small paper tag had been clipped to the front, but the name had been turned inward, hidden from the crowd. Every now and then, something moved behind the canvas. Not a bark, not a growl, just the faint shift of an old body changing position, as if the dog inside had heard a sound that had not yet happened. No one noticed. Not yet. 3 days earlier, Elias Rourke had been repairing the back steps of a widow's house in Pine Harbor. Elias was 59, a tall American man standing a little over 6 feet, built with the durable strength of someone shaped by weather, duty, and years of carrying more than his own weight. His shoulders were broad, his body still firm, but there was no vanity in the way he moved. His square face was sun-browned and lined, with a jaw that looked carved for silence. His gray-blue eyes were deep and calm, yet they carried a distance that made people speak softer around him without knowing why. His dark brown hair was cut short, a little rough on top, with silver at the temples, as if winter had brushed him with 2 fingers. A close-trimmed beard covered his jaw, giving him the worn, wind-blown look of a man who had survived storms he did not name. He wore the same thing most days, a plain tan military jacket faded by time, a brown-gray shirt beneath it, dark jeans, worn brown boots, and a black-faced military watch. The jacket had no patches, no medals, no hint of the life he had lived before Pine Harbor. To most people in town, Elias was simply the quiet volunteer. He fixed loose railings. He delivered food boxes. He cleared fallen branches after storms. He patched roofs for elderly neighbors who could no longer climb ladders. He never asked for money and rarely stayed long enough to be thanked. That morning, Mrs. Ada Bell, The 73-year-old widow, whose porch he was repairing, watched him from her kitchen doorway. Ada was small and sharp-eyed, with silver hair tied into a low bun and a blue-green cardigan wrapped around her thin shoulders. She had the kind of face that made kindness look practical instead of sentimental. "You know," she called, "most men your age complain when their knees crack." Elias drove the last nail into place. "Mine don't complain, they file reports," Ada snorted. "That is almost a joke, Mr. Rourke. Careful. People might start thinking you have a personality." A faint smile touched his face, brief as sunlight between clouds. When the repair was done, Elias loaded his tools into the back of his old pickup. He accepted a paper cup of coffee from Ada, only because refusing her had proven useless. Then he drove to the volunteer supply shed on the east side of town. The shed sat behind a small church, painted white with peeling blue trim. Inside were shelves of canned food, folded blankets, donated coats, storm lanterns, and boxes labeled in thick black marker. Caleb Mercer stood in the middle of it all, arguing with a broken space heater. Caleb was 62, shorter than Elias by several inches, with a solid body, a round, weather-reddened face, warm brown eyes, and a gray mustache that made every expression look slightly amused. His hair was mostly silver and cut close to his head. One knee troubled him in cold weather, so he walked with a slight limp, but he moved with the stubborn energy of a man who had spent his life showing up when others called for help. He wore a Navy volunteer jacket, khaki pants, old hiking boots, and a gray knit cap pushed back from his forehead. A dented metal thermos, patched with silver tape, was never far from his hand. Caleb was the only man in Pine Harbor who knew Elias had once been a Navy SEAL. He never said it aloud. That was one of the reasons Elias tolerated him. "You are late," Caleb said without looking up. "I was repairing Ada's steps. Then you are forgiven. Ada outranks me." Elias set a box of canned soup on the table. "Everyone outranks you." Caleb pointed a screwdriver at him. "That is the kind of disrespect that gets a man assigned to blanket inventory." Elias almost smiled again, but Caleb's face softened before the moment could pass. The older man reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded paper. He placed it on top of the soup box. Elias looked at it. "What is this? A reason for you to do something that is not fixing everyone else's life." Elias unfolded the paper. It was an invitation to the Pine Harbor Working K-9 Rehabilitation Benefit and Adoption event. His expression closed. "No." Caleb sighed. "You have not even read it." "I read enough. It is not a puppy fair. These are retired working dogs, police dogs, search dogs, some military contract dogs, dogs that need quiet homes." I said no. Caleb studied him for a moment. Behind the humor, his eyes held something patient and sad. A man should not live alone so long that the coffee maker becomes his closest relationship. "I have you. That is worse. I charge emotional interest." Elias folded the paper and set it down. "I had a dog once." Caleb did not joke this time. The supply shed grew quiet except for rain ticking lightly against the metal roof. Elias looked toward the shelves, but his eyes had gone somewhere else. "His name was Ranger," he said. "German Shepherd. Military working dog. Smarter than most officers I knew." Caleb leaned back against the table. Elias rarely spoke of the past. When he did, the words came out carefully, like broken glass being lifted from a wound. "He was my partner," Elias continued. "Not a pet, not equipment, partner." His thumb brushed the edge of the folded invitation. "We lost him on a mission after that. I decided once was enough." "Enough what?" Caleb asked quietly. "Enough losing." For a while, Caleb said nothing. Then he took out his phone. "I am not asking you to replace him," Caleb said. "Nothing good in this life gets replaced. Sometimes, though, something lost leaves a room behind, and maybe another creature needs that room more than you need the door locked." Elias looked at him, unimpressed. "You practice that?" "In the mirror. Every morning. With heroic lighting." Despite himself, Elias huffed once through his nose. Caleb unlocked his phone and opened the event page. "Just look. If nothing else, tell me these old dogs are ugly and I will drop it." Elias should have walked away. He knew that. Instead, he looked. The first photo showed a black Labrador with a gray muzzle. The second, a lean Belgian Malinois with one cloudy eye. The third, an old hound asleep under a red blanket. Elias swiped through them without interest, each image stirring pity but not recognition. Then his thumb stopped. The next photo showed a German Shepherd standing in a kennel doorway. The dog was old. His muzzle had gone silver almost to the eyes. His back had narrowed with age, though the frame beneath still held the memory of power. The coat was gold and black, dark across the shoulders, lighter along the chest. One ear stood tall, the other carried a torn notch near the tip. A small, ragged mark. A mark Elias had seen bleeding once beneath foreign dust. His breath changed. Caleb noticed immediately. Elias? The German shepherd in the photo looked directly at the camera, but somehow not at the camera. His amber-brown eyes seemed to be looking past the person holding the phone, past the kennel, past the years. Elias took the phone from Caleb's hand. He enlarged the picture, the torn ear, the silvering muzzle, the long black saddle across the back, the scar low on the right side of the chest, half hidden by fur. No, it was impossible. His heart did not care. What is his name? Elias asked. Caleb checked the page. The listing says Ranger. The supply shed seemed to lose all sound. Elias stared at the screen, and for one terrible holy second, the years between him and the battlefield folded like paper in a fist. Ranger. The name did not feel spoken. It felt returned. Caleb said something, but Elias did not hear it. He handed the phone back, picked up his tan jacket from the chair, and walked toward the door. Where are you going? Caleb asked, though his voice suggested he already knew. Elias paused with one hand on the doorframe. Outside, the late afternoon sky had begun to darken, and wind pushed brown leaves across the gravel lot. To see if ghosts get old, he said. Caleb's teasing smile faded. Elias stepped into the wind, crossed to his old pickup, and climbed inside. For a moment, he sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. His hands, steady through war, through divorce, through years of silence, trembled once against the worn leather. Then he turned the key. The truck rumbled awake. As Elias drove out of Pine Harbor toward the K-9 Rehabilitation Center, the folded invitation lay on the passenger seat beside him. The sun dropped low beyond the pine trees, staining the road gold and gray. He gripped the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping him in the present. If that dog was truly Ranger, then fate had done something cruel or merciful. Elias could not tell which. He only knew one thing. He had left Ranger behind once because war had given him no choice. This time, if the old dog was still alive, Elias Rourke would not let distance, fear, or money make the choice for him again. The road out of Pine Harbor narrowed as Elias Rourke drove west, leaving behind a volunteer shed, the church steeple, and the small town that knew his hands better than his history. The folded invitation lay on the passenger seat, trembling slightly each time the truck rolled over a crack in the road. Beyond the windshield, the late afternoon light thinned into a dull gold. Pine trees stood along both sides like silent witnesses, their black trunks sliding past one by one. Elias kept both hands on the wheel. He had driven into storms, into fire zones, into villages where windows watched back like suspicious eyes. Yet this road felt harder. There was no enemy ahead, no team on comms, no mission clock counting down. Only a photograph, only a name, Ranger. The name opened something inside him before he could stop it. Years earlier, Ranger had not been old or silver-muzzled. He had been 4 years old, a German shepherd in his prime, with a powerful gold and black body built like a drawn bow. His black saddle ran deep across his shoulders, darker on the left side, as if someone had thrown a shadowed cloak over him and never straightened it. His chest was a rich burnt gold, his front legs dark enough to look gloved, and his right ear carried a small V-shaped tear near the tip from a training accident he had survived, without a whimper. Ranger had amber-brown eyes that did not merely look at a man. They measured him. They remembered him. He was calm when other dogs strained at leashes. He watched before moving. He listened before reacting. In the field, that patience had saved lives. Back then, Elias had been Lieutenant Commander Elias Rourke. Though most men on the team simply called him Rourke, he had been younger, harder in the face, still capable of believing that discipline could hold every broken thing together if a man just kept his jaw tight enough. Ranger had known better. The dog had always known when Elias was angry, when he was afraid, and when silence was not strength but a locked door. The memory came with the smell of dust and hot metal. They had been sent to a half-abandoned compound beyond a dry riverbed, a place of cracked walls, rusted gates, and rooms that seemed to hold their breath. The intelligence report said a small group of civilians had been moved through the area. The report also said the building had been cleared 2 days earlier. Reports, Elias had learned, were only paper trying to sound brave. One of the men with him that day was Petty Officer Marcus Bell, 32 years old, broad-chested and dark-skinned, with a shaved head, kind eyes, and the easy grin of a man who made jokes so others would not hear his fear. Marcus had grown up in Georgia, had 2 little boys at home, and carried their drawings folded inside a waterproof pouch near his heart. He treated Ranger like another teammate, never like a tool. If that dog refuses to enter, Marcus had once said, I am refusing too. I have seen Ranger's judgment. I have seen yours. No offense, Commander, but Ranger wins. Elias had told him to shut up. Ranger had wagged his tail once, as if agreeing with Marcus. On the day everything changed, the team approached the compound slowly. Dust moved around their boots. The air was too still. Ranger walked ahead of Elias on a short lead, nose low, ears shifting forward and back. His body language was controlled, but Elias felt the change through the leash. Concern. Not fear, concern. Elias lifted one fist, and the team stopped. Ranger stared at a patch of earth near the entrance to the central building. It looked no different from the rest of the yard. Dry dirt, scattered stones, a broken strip of cloth caught on a nail. But Ranger would not move past it. He lowered his head, sniffed once, then stepped sideways and placed one paw firmly on the ground in front of Elias. Not forward, block. Elias understood. Back, he whispered. Marcus saw it too. His smile vanished. The team shifted away from the entrance, careful and slow. A bomb technician moved in and found the first device, hidden beneath the dust, wired beneath the path where their boots would have landed. No one spoke for several seconds. Marcus looked at Ranger and breathed, "Good boy." Ranger did not wag his tail. He only watched the doorway. That was the thing about Ranger. Praise did not interest him when the danger was not finished, and it was not finished. The second explosion came from deeper inside the compound, where no one had expected a device to remain. The blast did not roar like in films. It struck like the sky had been slammed shut. Light flashed white. The ground rose. Dust swallowed the walls. Elias hit the earth hard enough to lose his breath. For a moment, sound disappeared. Then came fragments. Men shouting, metal falling, someone coughing, Ranger barking. Not barking in panic, calling. Elias tried to push himself up and felt his body refuse. Something hot ran down his side. His vision narrowed, widened, then narrowed again. Through the dust, he saw Ranger moving in and out of sight, dragging himself toward a collapsed section of wall where Marcus had fallen. Ranger's right shoulder was bleeding. He did not stop. Marcus was pinned under a broken beam, dazed but alive. Ranger clawed at the dirt beside him, barking until the others found them. Elias tried to crawl toward them, but two corpsmen reached him first. One of them was Navy Corpsman Daniel Price, 28, lean and pale with sandy hair stuck to his forehead beneath his helmet. Daniel had the focused hands of a man who could be terrified later but never during. He pressed bandages against Elias's wound and shouted for evacuation. "Ranger," Elias rasped. Daniel did not answer. "Where is Ranger?" Another blast cracked somewhere beyond the wall. Not as large, but close enough to throw men flat again. Dust rolled over them. Voices overlapped. Someone yelled that the extraction bird was inbound. Someone else shouted that they had to move. Elias twisted against the hands holding him down. "Ranger!" Through the smoke, he saw the German shepherd one more time. Ranger stood near the broken entrance, body low, ears forward, eyes fixed on Elias. His mouth was open, chest heaving, blood dark against the gold fur at his shoulder. For 1 second, the dog did not look like an animal waiting for command. He looked like a soldier being ordered to stay behind. Elias lifted 2 fingers from the dirt and touched them weakly to his chest. "Stay with me." Ranger took 1 step forward. Then the dust thickened between them, and the hands of living men dragged Elias away. The helicopter lifted with its doors open to the storm of sand below. Elias fought the straps until Daniel leaned over him and pinned him with both hands. "You move again," Daniel shouted, "and you die before we clear the ridge." Elias stared past him at the vanishing ground. Ranger is still down there. Daniel's eyes flickered. Full of pity, he had no time to give. They will look. But war was a machine that ate promises. At the field hospital, Elias woke beneath white lights with tubes in his arm and a bandage wrapped around his ribs. His first clear thought was not pain. It was not gratitude. It was not even survival. It was Ranger. A week later, a major he barely knew stood at the foot of his bed and explained that records were incomplete. An Allied unit had recovered a wounded military working dog from the area, but the microchip reader had failed. Handler information had been damaged in the system transfer. The dog had been moved through emergency channels. Moved where? Elias demanded. The major was a narrow man in his 40s, with a clean uniform, tired gray eyes, and the helpless expression of someone delivering cruelty in professional language. "We are still confirming." "Then confirm faster." The man looked down at his folder. "Commander Rourke, there is no verified living status at this time." No verified living status. It was a phrase built to keep grief from having a body. Elias returned home months later with healed skin, stiff ribs, and the silence no one in his house knew how to enter. Mara Rourke tried. Mara was 50 at the time, a graceful woman with soft brown eyes, shoulder-length honey brown hair, and the composed strength of someone who had spent too many evenings pretending not to be afraid. She was not fragile. She had loved a soldier long enough to understand waiting, but waiting for Elias after he came home was different. Before, she had waited for his body. Now she was waiting for his soul. She would stand in the kitchen doorway at night and find him sitting alone in the dark, fully dressed, one hand resting over his left ribs where the scar pulled tight in cold weather. "Come to bed," she would whisper. "In a minute," he would say. The minute became months. Their daughter Lily had been 13 then, all long limbs, serious eyes, and questions she was learning not to ask. Lily had her father's gray-blue eyes, but in her young face they looked softer, wounded more easily. Her light brown hair was usually tied back in a crooked ponytail, and she had a habit of drawing dogs in the margins of her school notebooks, because she remembered Ranger from photographs and from the few good stories Elias had told before the silence took him. One night, Lily found him in the garage, staring at an old leash coiled inside a wooden box. "Dad," she asked, "did Ranger die?" Elias should have turned around. He should have knelt. He should have told her the truth, that not knowing was a kind of death that never finished happening. Instead, he closed the box. "I do not know," he said. Lily waited. "Do you miss him?" Elias nodded once. "Do you miss us too?" The question struck him harder than the blast had, but he did what he had learned to do under fire. He locked down. He stayed still. He told himself that if he did not open the wound, it would not bleed on her. Lily left the garage without another word. By the time Mara packed 2 suitcases and took Lily to her sister's house, there had been no shouting. That was the cruelest part. No broken plates, no slammed doors. Just a woman with tired eyes and a girl who no longer looked back from the car window. Mara's last words were quiet. "You came home, Elias, but you never returned." The truck hit a shallow pothole, pulling Elias back to the road. He blinked and saw Pine Harbor's last gas station pass on his right. The sky beyond the windshield had deepened from gold to iron blue. The K9 Rehabilitation Center was still miles away, but his chest already felt too small for his breath. He had told himself for years that Ranger was the thing he lost in war. Now, with the invitation on the seat and the name burning in his mind, Elias began to understand a more terrible truth. Ranger had not been the only one left behind. Somewhere between the dust, the hospital lights, the unopened wooden box, and his daughter's unanswered question, Elias had abandoned pieces of himself so carefully that he had mistaken the emptiness for survival. His phone buzzed once in the cup holder. A message from Caleb appeared on the screen. "Whatever you find there, don't run from it." Elias stared at the words at the next red light. Then he looked at his own reflection in the darkening windshield. Gray-blue eyes, weathered face, jaw tight enough to break stone. For years, he had helped strangers rebuild porches, roofs, fences, and rooms damaged by storms. But he had never rebuilt the room inside himself where Ranger's name still lay waiting. The light changed. Elias drove on, and as the first stars appeared above the black line of pines, he realized he was not only going to the rehabilitation center to find a dog, he was going to find the life he had buried with that dog's name. By the time Elias Rourke reached the Pine Harbor Working K9 Rehabilitation Center, the benefit event had already begun. The long timber building glowed against the coming evening, its windows bright and warm while the sky outside turned the color of old iron. Cars lined the gravel lot. Pickup trucks sat beside clean black SUVs. A few vans bore the logos of rescue groups, police foundations, and private security firms. The place looked less like an auction hall than a shelter, trying to dress itself in dignity for the sake of the animals inside. Elias parked near the edge of the lot and sat still for a moment. His hands remained on the steering wheel. The invitation lay beside him, folded and unfolded so many times that the paper had softened at the creases. Somewhere in that building, if the photograph was not a mistake, was a dog he had spent years trying not to remember too loudly. He stepped out of the truck and pulled his faded tan jacket tighter against the wind. Inside, the center smelled of pine boards, coffee, disinfectant, damp wool, and dog fur. Rows of chairs faced a low platform. Along one wall, framed photographs showed working dogs in their younger years, leaping over barriers, sitting beside police cruisers, wearing military harnesses, standing proudly beside handlers, whose faces had been blurred or cropped for privacy. A volunteer at the registration table looked up as Elias approached. Her name tag read Molly Keene. She was in her late 30s, short and round-faced, with curly red hair escaping from a clip and a scatter of freckles across her nose. She had the quick, practical kindness of someone who had organized too many community events to be fooled by either rich donors or stubborn old men. "Name?" she asked. "Elias Rourke." Molly ran one finger down a printed list. "You're on here, guest participant. Adoption interest unspecified. That sounds like me." She handed him a numbered card in a thin packet. "Rules are inside. This is not a purchase-only event. Donations matter, but placement review matters more. Some dogs require quiet homes. Some cannot go to commercial facilities. Some need medication or mobility support." Elias glanced at the number on the card. 37. It felt absurdly small in his hand. "How much do these usually go for?" he asked. Molly's expression softened a little. "Depends. Some adoption fees stay low. Some donors turn it into a competition." She leaned closer and lowered her voice. "The dogs never understand the money part. That is probably why they are better than we are." Elias nodded once and moved away. At the front of the room, Harold Pike was speaking into the microphone. Elias recognized him from Caleb's description, a silver-haired man with a slightly bent back, pale blue eyes, and a clipboard held like a shield against chaos. Harold looked tired but steady, the kind of man who had learned how to keep compassion from becoming disorder. "We ask everyone to remember," Harold said, "that every dog here has already given more than most of us will ever be asked to give. We are not looking for the highest number alone. We are looking for the right ending." A polite murmur moved through the crowd. Elias stood near the back rather than sit. His eyes moved over the room with old habit. Exits, corners, faces, tension, wealth. There were families with children holding adoption forms, elderly couples whispering about companionship, retired police officer in a Navy blazer who wiped his eyes when a black lab limped onto the platform and leaned into his former handler's knee. There were also men in tailored coats who did not look at the dogs' faces so much as their records. One of those men stood near the right aisle. Gavin Harlow was 51, tall at about 6'1", with a trim frame that looked maintained rather than tested. His dark hair, threaded with silver at the temples, was combed back with careful precision. His face was long, clean-shaven, and handsome in a cold way, with narrow gray eyes and a thin smile that rarely reached them. He wore a black cashmere coat, a white shirt, charcoal trousers, polished shoes, and black leather gloves so fine they seemed designed never to touch anything rough. Two younger men stood behind him, with folders bearing the logo of Harlow Sentinel Group, a private security company known around the region for expensive contracts and spotless vehicles. Gavin raised his donor card during the next introduction without hesitation. The amount doubled, then tripled. A family near the front lowered their hands. The old detection dog on the platform looked from one stranger to another, tail moving slowly, unaware that his future had just become a contest between a living room and a business plan. Elias felt something tighten beneath his ribs. A woman in a white veterinary coat crossed the side aisle carrying a stack of files. Dr. Nora Vale moved quickly but without rushing, as if every step had a purpose. She was 48, with a lean build, hazel green eyes, and chestnut hair tied low at the back of her neck. A few silver strands showed near her temples. Her coat was not spotless. One sleeve bore a faint paw print, and small scratches marked the backs of her hands. She had the kind of calm that animals trusted before humans understood why. She stopped near Harold and spoke quietly to him. Harold frowned at one of the files. Elias caught only a few words. Old transfer record, chip inconsistency, former military channel. His pulse changed. Nora looked briefly toward the back of the room, scanning faces as though searching for someone who did not know he was being searched for. Her gaze passed over Elias, paused for half a second, then moved on. A young handler led another dog onto the platform, and the room applauded gently. Elias did not hear the introduction. His attention remained fixed on the stack of files in Nora's hand, almost too quietly for anyone else to notice. A loose page slipped from Nora's folder and skidded across the floor near Elias's boot. He bent and picked it up. Most of the page showed routine medical notes: age estimate, hip stiffness, dental wear, scar mapping. But near the top, beneath a stamped line that read transfer history incomplete, someone had written in blue ink, possible original handler, E. Rourke. The rest of the name had been smeared by water or coffee. Elias's thumb froze over the torn corner of the page. Nora was suddenly beside him. "Thank you," she said, taking the paper gently. Her voice was controlled, but her eyes sharpened when she saw where he had been looking. "You are Mr. Rourke?" Elias did not answer immediately. "You have a dog here named Ranger." Nora studied him in silence, not unkindly. "We have a German Shepherd listed under that name. His records are complicated. I saw his photo. Many people saw his photo. I knew him." That changed her face. Not dramatically, just enough. The professional wall shifted, and something human looked through. Before she could respond, Harold called her name from the front. Nora tucked the page back into the folder. "Stay until the end, Mr. Rourke. Is he here?" She looked toward the side doors, where staff moved in and out of a restricted corridor. "He is here," she said. "But here does not always mean simple." Then she walked away. Elias remained standing with his numbered card in his hand. The event continued, but time began to behave strangely. Dogs came and went. Stories were read. Donations rose. Applause followed each placement. A retired search dog found a home with a quiet couple from the coast. An old narcotics dog went back to the former officer who had trained him years before. A limping shepherd mix received no bids at first, until Mrs. Ada Bell's church group pooled enough money to sponsor his care with a local foster. There was kindness in the room. There was also money. Gavin Harlow bid on 3 dogs and won 2 placements for evaluation. Each time he remained seated, raising his card with a small movement of gloved fingers. He never looked excited. He looked efficient. During a short break, Gavin approached the side table where Nora was reviewing files. "I heard there is an older military shepherd still pending," he said. Nora did not look impressed. "Several dogs have mixed service histories. I am interested in the one with combat exposure. Our company handles high-risk property security. A dog with that background carries value." Elias heard the word. Value. Not history, not loyalty, not sacrifice. Value. Nora closed the file in front of her. An 11-year-old dog with joint stiffness does not belong in high-risk security work. Gavin smiled politely. Not active work. Public relations. Training demonstrations. Legacy branding. People respond to stories. "So do dogs," Nora said. "Usually to the parts people leave out." For the first time, Gavin looked mildly irritated. Elias turned away before anger could make him reckless. He found a seat near the back. Though sitting made him feel trapped. The numbered card rested on his knee. He counted the cash in his wallet without taking it out. Then the balance in his checking account. Then the repair bill, waiting for his truck. Then the winter heating cost he had promised himself he would cover for Mrs. Ada if her furnace failed again. The math was simple. Cruel things often were. He could not compete. The afternoon thinned toward evening. Families left smiling or disappointed. Volunteers carried empty coffee cups to trash bags. The room grew quieter, as if everyone could sense the event was nearing its last and heaviest note. Harold returned to the microphone with one final folder in hand. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "we have one remaining dog to introduce. His placement is subject to additional review due to incomplete transfer history, but we will begin the sponsorship process tonight." Elias stood before he realized he had moved. The side door opened. A handler stepped through first, holding a short lead. He was a broad young man with careful hands and a face too gentle for the black tactical vest he wore. Behind him came the German Shepherd, Ranger. The old dog walked slowly, each step measured. His gold and black coat had faded with age. The black saddle still darker over the left shoulder. His chest carried silver through the burnt gold fur. His muzzle was almost entirely white now. One ear stood high. The right ear bore the small V-shaped tear. His hips were stiff. His body was tired. But his eyes, Elias forgot the room. Those amber-brown eyes lifted toward the lights, toward the crowd, toward the world that had misfiled him, moved him, used him, aged him, and still failed to erase him. Ranger paused near the platform. For one breath, he turned his head slightly toward the back of the room. Not enough for anyone else to understand, enough for Elias to stop breathing. Harold looked down at the file. "Ranger," he said into the microphone. "German Shepherd, approximately 11 years old, retired working K9, prior service history under review. Opening sponsorship pledge begins at $500. Elias lifted his card, but before Harold could acknowledge him, Gavin Harlow's black-gloved hand rose from the right aisle. "2,000, Gavin said. The room stirred. Elias turned his head slowly. Gavin did not look at him. He looked at Ranger the way a man might look at a rare antique with a useful story attached. Harold hesitated. Elias gripped his card so tightly the corner bent. The price of a name had just been spoken aloud. 2,000, Gavin Harlow said. The words did not sound loud, but they struck the room with the clean weight of money. Harold Pike remained at the microphone, one hand resting on Ranger's file. For half a second, his eyes moved from Gavin to Elias, then back to the paper in front of him. The old coordinator had seen enough benefit events to know when generosity had become a weapon. Elias stood near the back row, his donor card bent in his hand. Ranger remained on the platform beside the young handler, Jonah Reed, a 26-year-old kennel assistant with broad shoulders, sandy hair, and a face too gentle for the black utility vest he wore. Jonah held the leash carefully, not tight, not careless. He had the posture of a young man who had learned that old dogs deserved patience more than control. Ranger's gold and black coat shone under the overhead lights, though age had dulled the richness of it. His black saddle still leaned darker over the left shoulder. His front legs looked almost gloved in shadow. The right ear, torn in that familiar V-shaped notch, twitched once at the sound of Gavin's voice. Harold cleared his throat. "We have a pledge of $2,000. Elias raised his card. His voice came out rough. $2,500. A few heads turned. Not because the amount was high, but because the man who said it looked like he had just offered more than money. Elias did not have the polished calm of the donors near the front. He stood in an old tan military jacket, boots marked with road dust, jaw tight, gray-blue eyes fixed on the dog as if the rest of the room had fallen away. Gavin finally looked back at him. The smile on Gavin's face was small, polite, and empty. 3,000, Gavin said. The number settled like a locked gate. Elias looked down at the card in his hand. 3,000 was not impossible in the world. It was only impossible for him. He thought of his truck repairs, his winter heating bill, the envelopes of cash he kept for people too proud to ask for help. He thought of Mrs. Ada Bell's furnace. He thought of the roof he had promised to fix before the first hard snow. He could not buy back the past by stealing from the living. Harold waited. Any further pledge? The room was silent. Dr. Nora Vale stood near the side table, Ranger's file pressed against her chest. The veterinarian's hazel green eyes moved between Elias and the old German shepherd. Her expression did not soften into pity. Nora did not pity men or dogs easily. Pity was too cheap, but she understood pain when it stood upright and tried not to shake. Gavin adjusted one black leather glove. "If there are no other offers, Mr. Pike, my company will be happy to proceed with review." Elias felt the sentence like a hand closing around Ranger's collar. Not my company, not review, not him. He lifted his eyes to Harold. "May I ask something?" Harold lowered the microphone slightly. "Go ahead. I cannot match that pledge." No one laughed. No one shifted. Even Gavin remained still. Elias forced the next words past the stone in his throat. "But before you close this, I would like permission to say goodbye to him." The room changed, only a little, but enough. A woman in the second row lowered her program. Jonah looked toward Harold. Nora's fingers tightened on the file. Gavin's expression cooled, as if emotion were an inconvenience that had wandered into a business meeting. Harold studied Elias for a long moment. Then he nodded. "You may approach." Elias walked down the aisle. Each step felt longer than the road from Pine Harbor. The platform was only 30 feet away, but years rose between him and Ranger. Dust, hospital lights, unopened boxes, his daughter's unanswered question, the sound of a helicopter lifting while a dog remained below. Ranger watched him come. The old German shepherd did not wag his tail. He did not bark. He stood with his weight carefully balanced against stiff hips, head slightly lowered, eyes steady. To anyone else, he looked tired. To Elias, he looked like a soldier waiting to decide whether the man before him was memory or mercy. Elias stopped several feet away. Jonah held the leash but did not pull. "Easy, boy," the young handler murmured. Elias did not say Ranger's name. Not yet. Names could be wrong. Files could be wrong. Photographs could lie kindly to lonely men. But there were things only two soldiers knew. Elias raised two fingers slowly. Then he touched them to the left side of his chest. "Stay with me." Ranger froze. The effect was so sudden that Jonah's breath caught. The old dog's body became utterly still. His ears lifted. The torn right ear stood unevenly, its ragged notch bright beneath the lights. The cloudy fatigue in his face vanished, not because age had left him, but because something beneath age had awakened. Elias's hand trembled once. He lowered it, then gave the second signal. Two fingers down, palm open, no command spoken. Home, line clear. It had never been an official command. Not written in any manual, not approved by anyone who signed forms in clean offices. Elias had made it one night after a hard operation, when Ranger refused to settle until Elias tapped his palm twice against the ground beside him. After that, the signal had meant, "Come close, no threat, breathe." Ranger took one step. Jonah looked at Harold. Harold nodded almost imperceptibly. The leash slackened. Ranger took another step. Then, with a sound so low it was almost not a sound at all, the old German shepherd moved forward and pressed his head into Elias's chest. Elias folded around him. For a moment the room disappeared. There was only the weight of the dog against him, the coarse fur beneath his hands, the old scent of leather, medicine, and something deeper that no years had erased. Ranger leaned harder, not jumping, not performing, just pushing his tired body into the man who had once been the center of his world. Elias shut his eyes. His breath broke once. "Hey, old man," he whispered. "You waited too long," Ranger answered with a trembling whine. The sound traveled through the room like a prayer no one had meant to hear. A few people looked away. Molly Keene covered her mouth at the registration table. Harold stood very still. Nora lowered her eyes, not to hide tears, but to give the moment privacy. Then Ranger did something no one expected. He pulled back from Elias's chest, lowered his muzzle, and placed it gently against the back of Elias's left hand. Not a lick, not a nudge, a deliberate touch. Elias went still. In the field, Ranger had done that only once before, after Elias had been injured, when the dog found him bleeding in dust and pressed his muzzle to the same hand as if counting him among the living. Elias looked down at the old dog. Ranger looked back. The room had seen recognition. Elias had just seen remembrance. Nora stepped forward quietly. "Mr. Pike." Harold turned. Nora opened Ranger's file on the edge of the platform and removed a small plastic evidence sleeve. Inside was an old metal identification tag, scratched and darkened with time. "This was removed from his intake collar," Nora said. "I held it aside because the number did not match the current transfer file." Gavin's voice cut in smoothly. "Is this necessary in front of everyone?" Nora did not look at him. "Yes." She held the sleeve up to the light. "The printed record lists a handler code that does not resolve, but the tag has a partial unit mark and the initials ER beneath the corrosion." Elias felt the air leave his chest. Harold leaned closer. "Can you confirm?" "Not fully tonight," Nora said, "but enough to suspend public placement, especially with the dog's response." She looked at Gavin then, calm and unyielding. "This is no longer a simple sponsorship issue. This is an identity issue." Gavin's jaw tightened. Harold returned to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice steady but lower now, "due to incomplete transfer history and possible prior handler claim, Ranger will be withdrawn from tonight's public adoption process pending review." A murmur moved through the room. Gavin stepped forward. "Mr. Pike, my pledge was made in good faith, and it is appreciated," Harold replied. "But our rules are clear. Placement may be suspended if prior service identity or handler priority requires verification. This is irregular." Harold's pale blue eyes hardened. "So is losing a working dog in a paperwork chain for nearly a decade." That ended it. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. Gavin looked at Elias, then at Ranger, and for a brief second his polished mask slipped. Beneath it was irritation, yes, but also something like confusion. He understood contracts. He understood bids. He understood branding. What he did not seem to understand was a dog recognizing a man through age, light, and years of absence. He gave a cold nod and stepped back. The event moved toward its close after that, but its warmth had changed. People spoke more softly. Volunteers stacked chairs. Families left through the front doors, carrying adoption packets and tired smiles. Jonah led Ranger back through the side corridor, though Ranger turned his head again and again until Elias could no longer see him. Elias stayed. He stood outside near the rear kennel entrance while the evening grew colder. Wind pressed dry leaves against the fence. Through a small square window in the door, he could see a strip of hallway light, and beyond it, the shadows of kennels. He told himself to go home. He did not move. Nearly 40 minutes later, the rear door opened. Harold Pike stepped out first, carrying the folder. Nora followed, her white coat replaced by a dark green jacket, her hair slightly loosened from the long day. Caleb Mercer was with them too, thermos in hand, Navy volunteer jacket zipped to his throat. Elias looked at Caleb. "You knew?" Caleb shrugged, but his eyes were damp. "I hoped." Harold opened the folder. "Dr. Vale contacted the archive liaison we use for complex K-9 transfers. We do not have every record yet, but we have enough. The handler initials, unit fragment, scar map, and age progression align with your statement." Nora added, "His health profile also makes commercial placement unsuitable. He needs quiet, medication, routine, and someone he already trusts." Elias swallowed. "I do not have $3,000. Caleb lifted the thermos slightly. "Good. I was afraid you had started robbing banks without inviting me." Harold almost smiled. "The sponsorship pledge is no longer applicable." Caleb's volunteer fund will cover the initial medical support. The adoption fee can be waived under prior handler reunification, pending final paperwork. Elias looked from one face to the other. He had trained himself not to accept rescue. That was the hardest kind to receive. Nora opened the rear door wider. Inside the hallway, Ranger stood waiting. No handler held him now. No leash pulled him forward. The old German shepherd simply stood beneath the yellow light, silver muzzle lifted, amber brown eyes fixed on Elias. Harold's voice softened. "Take him home, Mr. Rourke." Elias stepped inside. Ranger came to him slowly, stiff hips and all, and pressed his shoulder against Elias's leg. Elias bent and rested one hand on the torn ear. "Come on," he whispered. "We are done leaving each other behind." He guided Ranger out to the old pickup. The dog needed help climbing in, and Elias gave it without shame, one arm supporting Ranger's chest, the other steadying his hind legs. When Ranger settled into the passenger seat, he turned in a slow circle, then lowered his silver muzzle onto Elias's folded tan jacket. Caleb stood near the rear door of the center. "Drive careful." Elias nodded. The engine turned over. The headlights cut a pale road through the dark. As Elias drove back toward Pine Harbor, Ranger slept beside him for the first time in years. The truck cab was quiet except for the heater and the soft breathing of an old soldier finally off duty. Elias kept one hand on the wheel. With the other, he rested two fingers against his chest. Not as a command this time, as a promise. For 3 days, Elias Rourke learned the quiet weight of having Ranger home. It was not the triumphant reunion people imagined when old soldiers found each other again. There were no medals, no music, no grand speeches beneath flags. There was only a small house at the end of a pine road, an old German shepherd sleeping near the stove, and a man who moved more gently than he had in years because something fragile had trusted him again. Ranger's body had changed more than Elias wanted to admit. The German shepherd still carried the frame of the powerful war dog he had once been. Gold and black coat dark over the left shoulder, front legs shadowed like old gloves, and that familiar torn V at the tip of his right ear, but age had thinned him. His muzzle was silver almost to the eyes. His hips were stiff when he rose. His breathing grew heavy after crossing the room too quickly. Dr. Nora Vale had sent Elias home with joint medication, soft food, a heating pad, and instructions written in a firm hand. No stairs if avoidable, no long runs, no rough terrain, no working conditions. Elias had read the last line twice. Then he had looked at Ranger, who lay beside the hearth with his chin on his paws and his amber brown eyes half open, watching every move Elias made. "You hear that?" Elias had murmured. "Retirement." Ranger had exhaled through his nose, unimpressed. Elias had almost laughed. The sound surprised him. By the third evening, the weather began to turn. At first, it was only rain ticking against the roof. Pine Harbor was used to storms rolling off the coast and breaking themselves against the inland hills. But by sundown, the rain sharpened. Wind pushed through the trees with a low animal sound. The local radio warned of flooding near the northern roads, fallen branches along the old logging routes, and possible power outages before midnight. Elias stood at the kitchen window with a mug of coffee cooling in his hand. His house was simple. Wood stove in the main room, tools stacked neatly near the back door, 2 chairs at the small kitchen table, though only one had been used for years. Ranger's new bed lay near the hearth, thick with folded blankets. Beside it sat a stainless steel water bowl, medication bottles, and a worn tennis ball Elias had bought without knowing why. The ball remained untouched. Ranger lifted his head before the phone rang. Elias noticed. The old dog's ears moved first, the good one rising, the torn one following a little slower, his eyes fixed on the kitchen counter where Elias's phone sat dark and silent. Then the phone lit up. Mara Rourke. For a moment, Elias did not move. Mara had not called him in months. His former wife was 57 now, though Elias still sometimes saw the younger woman from old photographs when her name appeared. Mara was graceful in a tired, weathered way, with shoulder-length honey-brown hair, threaded with gray and dark brown eyes that had once been warm enough to make a house feel safe. She had never been weak. If anything, she had survived Elias's silence longer than most people could have, but survival had sharpened her. It had taught her how to speak softly while already preparing to leave. Elias picked up. "Mara?" Her breath came broken through the speaker. "Elias." He straightened. "What happened?" "It's Lily." The name shook. "She's missing." The room changed shape around him. Ranger rose slowly, stiff hips protesting, but he stood. Elias gripped the counter. "Start from the beginning," Mara tried. Fear made her words stumble. Lily had driven out before the worst of the storm to pick up a box from a friend near North Line Road, an old forest route that locals used when the main highway backed up. Lily had sent one text at 4:18 p.m. Road getting ugly. I'll be home soon. After that, nothing. No call, no new location, no answer. The sheriff's office had been notified. A search team was forming at the old ranger station near the North Woods, but the storm had already washed out parts of the road. Cell signal in that area was poor even in good weather. In this weather, it was nearly useless. How long? Elias asked. Almost 5 hours. He closed his eyes once. 5 hours in a storm was not time. It was a blade. Lily Rourke was 21, no longer the little girl with crooked ponytails and dog drawings in her school notebooks. In Elias's mind, she appeared in fragments, pale gray-blue eyes like his but more wounded, light brown hair falling loose from a hurried knot, a stubborn mouth inherited from both parents, and the burgundy rain jacket Mara had bought her because Lily hated bright red, but still wanted to be seen at night. She was independent now. Too independent, Elias sometimes thought, though he knew exactly where she had learned it, from parents who taught her not to need them. I'm going, Elias said. Elias, the sheriff said civilians should not. I'm not going alone. I'll call Caleb. I'll coordinate. Mara's voice cracked. Please do not make me lose both of you tonight. That struck deeper than accusation would have. Elias looked at Ranger. The old dog had moved to the door. No, Elias said quietly. Not both. He ended the call and moved. Not frantically. Frantic wasted time. The old part of him woke with cold precision. Not the part that loved war, but the part that knew fear could be folded into action if a man's hands stayed busy. He pulled a waterproof pack from the hall closet. Radio, flashlight, spare batteries, first aid kit, thermal blanket, rope, compass, paper map, reflective vest, bottled water. He called Caleb while packing. Caleb answered on the second ring, wind already roaring behind him. The volunteer captain's usual humor was gone. I heard. I'm heading to the ranger station. I'm coming. I know you are. I need Sheriff Harlan to know I have search experience. He knows enough about you to listen, not enough to argue. Elias paused. Caleb, I'll tell him you are not some fool trying to play hero in a storm, Caleb said. But you follow his grid. You stay on radio. You do not vanish into those woods alone. I won't. Good, Caleb said. Because if you do, I will haunt you before you die. It should not have helped. It did. Elias hung up and turned toward Ranger. You stay. Ranger stood near the front door, his old body braced, eyes clear. No, Elias said more firmly. You heard Nora. No working conditions. Ranger did not move. Thunder rolled over the house. The lights flickered once. Elias stepped closer and lowered his voice. I just got you back. Ranger's ears shifted. For a breath, the house seemed to hold both of them in the same terrible question. What is the value of being safe when someone you love is out in the dark? Elias opened the door to load the truck. Rain burst inward. Before he could block him, Ranger stepped into the storm. Not fast, not strong, but certain. The old German shepherd walked through the rain, crossed the small porch, descended the ramp Elias had built 2 days earlier, and stopped in front of the truck. Then he sat squarely before the hood, water running down his silver muzzle, torn ear angled into the wind. Elias stood in the doorway, rain striking his face. Ranger. The dog looked at him, not pleading, reporting. Ranger, who had barely crossed the room without stiffness that morning, now sat in a storm as if an invisible command had reached him before any human voice could. Elias did not feel superstition often. He had buried too much in facts and training, but in that moment, with thunder above and his daughter missing beyond the northern woods, he felt something older than training move through the air between them. Not magic. Recognition. Some bonds did not end when duty did. Elias grabbed Ranger's waterproof field blanket from the hook, wrapped it over the dog's back, and helped him into the passenger side of the truck. If you slow down, Elias said, fastening the blanket, we stop. If you hurt, we turn back. You hear me? Ranger settled into the seat and stared forward. Elias drove. The old ranger station sat near the edge of the North Woods. A low building of brown logs and storm-battered windows. Red and blue emergency lights flashed through sheets of rain. 2 sheriff vehicles, Caleb's volunteer truck, and a county rescue van were already there. Sheriff Tom Harlan stood under the porch light, with a radio clipped close to his chest. Tom Harlan was 55, about 5'11", with a solid build, heavy shoulders, and a rectangular face weathered by years of standing in bad weather to deliver bad news. His hair was dark blonde gone mostly gray, cut short beneath a rain-dark hat. He had pale blue eyes, a close-shaved jaw, in the careful manner of a man who believed panic was contagious and therefore refused to carry it. He looked at Ranger first, then at Elias. "No," Harlan said. Elias stepped out into the rain. "He has Lily's scent if Mara brings something recent. That dog is old. Yes. This terrain is bad. Yes. I am not letting a man and an elderly dog wander off because of a hunch." "Good," Elias said. "Then don't. Put me on a team. Keep me on radio. Give me a grid." Harlan studied him. Caleb limped over from the rescue van, navy jacket soaked at the shoulders, dented thermos in one hand like a badge of office. "Tom, he knows the North Ridge better than half your deputies. And that dog was military working K9. Harlan's eyes narrowed. Was. Ranger lifted his head from the passenger seat and looked toward the dark tree line. Not at the people, at the woods. Mara arrived 10 minutes later in a gray sedan, tires hissing through mud. She stepped out wearing a long charcoal coat over a cream sweater, her honey-brown hair damp against her face, car keys clenched so tightly in one hand that her knuckles had gone pale. In the other hand, she held a burgundy scarf. Lily's scarf. Mara saw Elias, then Ranger, and for 1 second grief, surprise, and old memory crossed her face together. "You found him," she whispered. Elias nodded. "Mara, the scarf." She handed it over. Ranger sniffed once from the truck. Then his entire posture changed. The old dog pushed forward, nose working, eyes suddenly sharp beneath the rain. Elias helped him down carefully. Ranger lowered his muzzle to the scarf, breathed deeply, then turned away from the station, away from the main road, and faced the northern tree line. Sheriff Harlan followed the direction of the dog's gaze. "That trail was marked unsafe," he said. "We skipped it because runoff is cutting across the lower bend." Ranger took 2 stiff steps toward it. Elias looked into the dark between the pines. The rain was already erasing the path, but Ranger had found something the storm had not. Elias tightened the radio strap across his chest. "Sheriff," he said, "I think Lily went that way." The northern trail looked less like a path and more like a wound cut through the trees. Rain ran down the slope in silver ropes. Mud swallowed the edges of the old logging road. Pine branches bent under the storm, throwing water into the faces of the search team as if the forest itself wanted them gone. Sheriff Tom Harlan stood beside the trail marker, with his radio pressed near his chest. "No one moves without a check-in every 5 minutes," he said. "No one breaks line of sight unless I say so. Rourke, your dog leads, but my team controls the descent." Elias nodded. "Understood." Caleb Mercer tightened the hood of his Navy volunteer jacket. Rain dripped from his gray mustache, and his bad knee had already begun to stiffen, but the old volunteer captain stayed upright with stubborn dignity. "For the record," Caleb muttered, "I hate heroic forests. They are always wet." A deputy joined them carrying a coil of rope over one shoulder. Her name was Sarah Whitcomb, 38 years old, tall and lean, with dark skin, sharp cheekbones, and black hair braided tightly beneath a rain hood. Sarah had the calm, clipped manner of someone who had spent years doing search and rescue work in places where panic could kill faster than weather. Her eyes moved constantly. Ground, trees, slope, team, dog. She looked at Ranger, not with doubt exactly, but with concern. "He can walk this?" she asked. Elias looked down. Ranger stood in his waterproof field blanket, silver muzzle wet, torn ear angled into the rain. The old German shepherd's hips were stiff, and his legs trembled faintly whenever thunder rolled through the woods. But his nose remained low. His amber-brown eyes were fixed on the trail. "He can tell us where to start," Elias said. "We carry him back if we have to." Sarah nodded once. That answer satisfied her. They entered the woods in a staggered line. Sarah moved first, checking footing with a trekking pole. Ranger followed on a loose working lead held by Elias. Caleb came behind them with a flashlight. 2 more volunteers kept to the rear, marking trees with reflective tape so the team could return if the trail vanished under runoff. The storm made every step uncertain. Water slid over exposed roots. Mud grabbed at boots. Branches cracked overhead and fell somewhere deeper in the trees with dull, heavy thuds. The beams of their flashlights broke apart in the rain, turning the forest into fragments. A wet trunk, a white stone, a torn fern, Ranger's dark back moving steadily ahead. Elias watched the dog more than the ground. Ranger did not move like the young war dog Elias remembered. There was no effortless power now, no silent speed. Each step cost him. Each rise of the slope made his breathing heavier. Twice, Elias stopped him and knelt to check his legs. "You tell me when it is too much," Elias said. Ranger ignored him and lowered his nose again. Caleb leaned close. "He always this stubborn?" Elias glanced at him. "Worse. Good. I like him already." They had gone perhaps 200 yards when Ranger stopped near a fallen cedar. Sarah lifted one hand. The line halted. Ranger turned toward a thorn bush, half flattened by rain. Elias moved his flashlight over it and saw something caught on the thorns. A small strip of burgundy fabric, darkened with water, but still recognizable. Lily's rain jacket. Elias did not reach for it at first. For a terrible second, the forest seemed to bend around the little piece of cloth. It was not proof of life. It was not proof of death. It was only a sign that his daughter had passed this way, frightened or hurried or already hurt. Sarah photographed the fabric before removing it with gloved fingers. "Sheriff, this is Whitcomb. We have a possible clothing trace. North Trail, approximately 200 yards in." Harlan's voice crackled through the radio. "Copy. Hold position and mark it." Elias stared at the strip in Sarah's hand. Caleb touched his shoulder. She was moving. That matters. Elias wanted to believe him. Ranger pulled gently forward. They continued. The path narrowed, then dipped toward a ravine where stormwater had carved new channels through the dirt. Sarah moved slower now. She checked every step, every patch of mud, every broken branch. Elias forced himself to breathe in rhythm with the rain. Fast fear would only blind him. Ranger's lead went taut. The dog had stopped again. This time he faced not the trail, but the slope to their left. A long smear of disturbed mud ran downward between roots and rocks, almost hidden by the rain. Elias saw a partial boot print near the edge, smaller than his. The tread pattern looked like a woman's hiking boot. His chest tightened. Sarah crouched. Someone slipped here. Caleb aimed his flashlight down the slope. "Can a person climb back up from that?" "Maybe," Sarah said, "if uninjured, if they could see, if the ground held." None of those words comforted anyone. Harlan came through the radio. "Do not descend until rope team reaches you. Repeat, do not descend." Elias gripped the lead. Every instinct in him screamed to go down. Every father in him wanted to throw himself into the ravine and search with bare hands. But the soldier in him, the better part, the part that had survived long enough to learn humility, held still. He keyed the radio. "Copy, holding." That was when Ranger heard it. At first, Elias thought the old dog was losing the scent. Ranger lifted his head from the mud and turned one ear toward the blackness below. His body went still, not the alert stillness from the adoption hall, not recognition, but listening. A faint metallic tap came through the rain once, then again, tap, tap. Sarah looked up. Did anyone else hear that? Caleb held his breath. The sound came again, distant and uneven, like metal striking stone somewhere beneath the rush of water. Ranger gave one low whine and stepped toward the slope. Elias's mouth went dry. "Lily," he called. The forest swallowed his voice. No answer came back. Only the tap, tap, tap. Sarah's expression changed. "Sheriff, we have possible sound contact below the North Ravine. Request rope team now." "Already moving," Harlan replied. 2 minutes. Those 2 minutes felt longer than the war. The rope team arrived with Sheriff Harlan and a county medic named Luis Ortega. Luis was 45, compact and strong, with warm brown skin, close-cropped black hair, and steady hands that moved with quiet certainty. His rain jacket bore the county rescue emblem. He had the gentle eyes of a man who had seen fear up close and learned never to raise his voice around it. Sarah anchored the rope around a thick pine and checked Elias's harness herself. "You go slow," she told him. "If the ground gives, you freeze. You do not play hero." Elias met her eyes. "I am done playing anything." She held his gaze, then clipped the line. Ranger could not descend the steepest part. Elias knew it, and the knowledge hurt almost as much as fear for Lily. He crouched beside the dog. "Stay with Caleb." Ranger resisted, not with force, but with a quiet refusal in his eyes. Caleb took the lead gently. "Come on, old soldier. Let the two-legged fool do the sliding." Elias descended with Sarah beside him and Luis behind them. Mud smeared his boots. Rain slapped his face. Twice, loose stones shifted under him. The rope held. At the bottom of the slope, his flashlight struck metal. A car. Lily's car lay tilted between two young maples, its front end pressed into a bank of rock and mud. One headlight flickered weakly. The driver's door hung open. The seat was empty. Elias froze. For one beat, he was back under dust, searching for Ranger through smoke. Then Sarah's voice cut through. "Vehicle located. No occupant inside." Elias moved to the open door. "Lily." No answer. Luis checked the vehicle quickly. Airbag deployed. Blood trace on the steering wheel. Small amount. She was conscious enough to exit. Elias forced himself to hear the words. Conscious enough. Alive enough above them. Ranger barked once. Not loud. Sharp. Directional. Caleb shouted from the ridge. "He's pulling east." Sarah looked at Elias. "Can he track from up there?" "He can try." They moved along the ravine floor, keeping the rope line extended. Above, Caleb and Ranger followed the ridge slowly, parallel to them. Ranger's silhouette appeared between trees whenever lightning flashed. Old, soaked, stubborn, still working. The metallic tapping came again. Closer now. Tap, tap. Elias followed it past a narrow run of water and around a cluster of boulders. His flashlight caught something pale beneath an overhang. A hand. Lily. This time, a weak voice answered. Dad. The word broke him and remade him in the same breath. Lily Rourke lay half-sheltered in a shallow rock hollow, wrapped in her torn burgundy rain jacket. She was 21, with light brown hair plastered to her face, gray-blue eyes wide with cold and fear, and a stubborn set to her jaw that even shock had not erased. Mud streaked one cheek. Her left ankle was twisted at an unnatural angle, but she was alive. In one trembling hand, she held a small metal flashlight, tapping it against the stone because the bulb had died. Elias dropped to his knees beside her. Don't move, Luis said, already opening his medical kit. Lily stared at Elias as if unsure he was real. I tried to call. I know. The car slid. I got out. I thought if I climbed higher. Her voice shook. I got turned around. Elias wrapped the thermal blanket around her shoulders with hands that wanted to tremble but would not. You did good. You stayed alive. Her eyes filled. I was scared. So was I. The honesty startled her more than comfort would have. Above them, Ranger whined. Lily turned her head toward the sound. Through the rain, the old German shepherd had found a lower shelf of rock with Caleb's help. He could not reach the hollow fully, but he lowered himself near the opening, panting hard, silver muzzle dripping rain. Lily looked at him. Recognition moved slowly across her face, not from memory of the living dog, but from photographs. Old pictures Elias had once kept hidden, a younger ranger beside a younger father, a war dog from a story no one finished telling. That's him, she whispered. That's Ranger. Elias nodded. Ranger stretched his neck and rested his silver muzzle near Lily's wrist, careful and quiet, as though checking that she belonged to the living. Lily began to cry then, not loudly, not like a child, but like someone who had been brave for too long in the dark. Elias leaned close. Listen to me. I have been too far from you for too long, but tonight I am here. She gripped the edge of his sleeve. Dad. That single word carried more mercy than Elias deserved. The rescue took nearly 20 minutes. Sarah and Luis stabilized Lily's ankle, secured her in a rescue harness, and guided her up the slope with Harlan's team pulling from above. Elias climbed beside her, one hand near her shoulder, not because the rope needed him, but because she did. When Lily finally reached the ridge, Mara's voice broke through the radio in a sob of relief from the ranger station. But Ranger did not rise. The old dog had taken 3 steps toward Lily as the team brought her up. Then his back legs folded beneath him. He sank into the mud beside the trail, chest heaving, rain darkening the field blanket across his shoulders. Elias reached him first. Ranger. The dog's amber eyes opened halfway. Elias knelt in the mud, one arm around the old German shepherd's wet body, the other hand braced beneath his chest. All the fear he had held back for Lily now turned toward the friend he had only just found again. No, Elias whispered. Not after this, you hear me? Ranger breathed against his sleeve. Luis hurried over, checking the dog with a practiced gentleness. He's exhausted and cold. We need to get him warm now. Elias bent his head until his forehead touched Ranger's soaked fur. For years, he had not known how to pray without feeling foolish. But in that storm, with his daughter alive behind him and his old partner trembling in his arms, Elias Rourke prayed like a man who had finally run out of walls. Stay, he whispered. Please, boy, stay with me. Ranger survived the ride back through the storm. That was what Elias Rourke kept telling himself as the county rescue van followed the sheriff's cruiser down the flooded road toward Pine Harbor. Ranger lay across a thermal blanket in the back, his silver muzzle resting near Elias's knee, his old body trembling beneath layers of towels and emergency wraps. Luis Ortega had checked him twice before they left the trailhead. He is exhausted, the medic had said. Cold, overworked, probably in pain, but he is breathing steady, breathing steady. Elias held on to those words like a rope. Lily had been taken ahead to the county medical station. Her ankle needed x-rays, and her body temperature had dropped dangerously low, but she was conscious, alive, asking questions, crying when Mara's voice came over the radio. Now beneath the harsh lights of Dr. Nora Vale's clinic, Ranger looked smaller than he had in the woods. The clinic sat behind the K9 Rehabilitation Center, a clean one-story building smelling of antiseptic, wet fur, and warm towels. Nora moved around the treatment room with calm precision. Her chestnut hair had come loose from its tie, and rain darkened the shoulders of her green jacket, but her hands remained steady. She did not waste words. She checked Ranger's temperature, listened to his heart, examined his hips and paws, and gave him warmed fluids. Elias stood near the wall, still wearing his soaked tan jacket, mud drying on his boots. Nora looked up. "He is alive because you stopped when he needed to stop." Elias swallowed. He collapsed. He completed more than any 11-year-old shepherd with joint disease should have been asked to do. Nora's voice softened, but only slightly. "And now he is finished with that kind of work." Elias nodded. He understood. A warrior did not become less noble because the battlefield no longer had a right to him. Ranger opened one eye. His amber-brown gaze found Elias through the clinic light. Elias stepped closer and placed one hand near the dog's shoulder. "No more missions," he whispered. Ranger exhaled, long and tired, as though he had been waiting years for someone to say it and mean it. At the county medical station, Lily Rourke woke under a white blanket with a brace around her ankle. The station was small, more urgent care clinic than hospital, with rain tapping against the windows and fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Nurse Helen Graves checked Lily's pulse with practiced gentleness. Helen was in her early 60s, a compact woman with warm brown skin, silver hair cut close to her head, and eyes that seemed to have comforted half the town at one time or another. She had the dry humor of someone who had cleaned wounds, held hands, and told frightened families to breathe for 40 years. "You gave everyone a scare," Helen said. Lily's lips were pale. "Is my mom here?" "Right outside." "My dad?" Helen paused, and the pause told Lily enough. "He is at the animal clinic with Ranger," Helen said. "The dog who helped find you." Lily turned her face toward the window. Rain slid down the glass in thin, crooked lines. "Ranger," she whispered. Mara Rourke entered a moment later. Mara's charcoal coat was damp, her honey-brown hair clinging to one cheek, and her eyes were red from the kind of crying that did not care who saw. She crossed the room quickly and took Lily's hand in both of hers. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Lily began to cry. Not from pain, not only from fear, from the awful delayed knowledge that she had been alone in the dark, and then, somehow, had not been alone anymore. Mara bent over her daughter and pressed her forehead to Lily's hand. "You scared 10 years off my life." Lily tried to smile. "You always said I acted older than my age." "That is not funny." "It was a little funny." Mara laughed once through tears, and the sound broke the tension in the room like a small candle lit after a blackout. An hour later, Elias came to the medical station. He had changed nothing about himself. Mud still marked his jeans. His face looked carved from exhaustion. His gray-blue eyes were darker than usual, not from cold, but from all the things he had almost lost in one night. He stopped outside Lily's room, one hand resting on the doorframe. Mara sat beside the bed. She looked up. For years, silence between them had been a wall. Tonight it felt like a field after battle, damaged, open, and finally without gunfire. "Ranger?" Lily asked before Elias could speak. "He is alive," Elias said. "Nora says he needs rest, a lot of it." Lily closed her eyes. "Good." Elias stepped inside. He did not know where to stand. That was the strange cruelty of family after distance. A man could cross hostile ground, read danger in shadows, carry rope into a ravine, and still not know where to place his hands in his daughter's room. Mara rose. "I'll get coffee." It was not really about coffee. Elias knew it. Lily knew it. But neither stopped her. When Mara left, Lily looked at him carefully. She was 21, bruised, pale, wrapped in blankets, her light brown hair still damp around her face. Yet in her eyes he saw the same child who had once stood in a garage doorway and asked whether he missed them too. "I saw him in the pictures," Lily said. "Ranger, you kept them in that wooden box." Elias nodded. "I thought you loved that dog more than you loved us." The words were soft. They hurt anyway. Elias sat in the chair beside the bed. "I know." Lily looked surprised. Maybe she had expected him to deny it. He rubbed both hands together, staring at the mud beneath his fingernails. "I loved you, your mother, more than I knew how to carry. But after I came home, everything inside me was locked. I thought if I kept the worst parts away from you, I was protecting you. You just kept yourself away." Yes, the answer cost him. Lily's eyes filled again. "I waited for you to say something. Anything. I was a kid, Dad. I thought maybe I had done something wrong." Elias bent forward as if the words had struck his chest. "No," he said. "No, sweetheart. That was never yours." She looked at him for a long time. Outside the room, thunder faded into a low distance. The storm was moving east, not a mystery of danger, but a quiet turn of the heart. Lily reached beneath the collar of her hospital gown and pulled out a thin silver chain. On it hung a small starfish pendant, scratched along one edge. Elias stared at it. He had given her that necklace when she was 8, after a weekend trip to the coast, back when she still ran ahead of him on the sand and believed he could fix anything. I kept it, Lily said. Her voice shook, even when I was angry. Elias could not speak. I wanted to hate you, she whispered. But I kept this stupid little starfish like some part of me was still waiting for you to come back. Elias lowered his head. I am sorry, he said. Not quickly. Not as a defense. Not as a soldier reporting guilt in clean language. As a father. I am sorry I made you wait so long. Lily reached across the blanket and took his hand. Her fingers were cold. He held them gently, afraid that if he gripped too hard, the moment would vanish. I am not saying everything is fixed, she said. I know. I am not saying Mom should come back. I know. I am saying, she swallowed, I want you to try, really try, not just show up when there is an emergency. Elias nodded. I can do that. Lily gave him a tired look. You can start by answering texts. A sound escaped him. Half laugh, half grief. I can do that too. 3 weeks later, Pine Harbor no longer smelled of rain. The storm had left broken branches, flooded ditches, and stories that would grow larger each time they were told at the diner. Sheriff Harlan called Ranger, the retired consultant. Caleb claimed the dog had better judgment than the entire county board. Mrs. Ada Bell said that if Ranger ever ran for mayor, she would manage the campaign. Ranger did not care about any of it. He cared about the hearth. The old German shepherd lay on a thick bed near Elias's stove, wrapped in a knitted blanket Ada had made with blue and gray yarn. His medication bottle stood on a small shelf beside the firewood. His tennis ball still sat unused nearby, but now Lily sometimes rolled it gently toward him when she visited, and Ranger would place one paw on it as if humoring her. Elias's house changed in small ways. A second chair at the kitchen table was used again. Then a third. Lily came by on crutches first, then with a walking boot, then carrying grocery bags, and pretending she had not come just to check on him. Mara called on Sundays to ask about Ranger's appetite, then sometimes asked about Elias's. Caleb appeared with coffee and bad jokes. Mrs. Ada brought soup in containers labeled with instructions Elias was forbidden to ignore. Elias still volunteered. He still fixed porches, delivered supplies, and cleared storm debris, but something in the work had changed. He no longer used other people's broken things to avoid his own. When someone thanked him, he did not disappear quite so quickly. One afternoon, Lily stood in his living room looking at the wall above the small bookshelf. 2 photographs hung there now. The first was old, Elias younger, face harder, standing in uniform beside Ranger in a military harness. Both of them looked toward the camera with the same grave attention. The second was new. Elias stood on his front porch beside Lily, who leaned on one crutch and looked annoyed about being photographed. Ranger sat between them, silver muzzle lifted, torn ear crooked, Ada's knitted blanket visible just inside the open door. Lily studied the pictures. You look less scary now, she said. Elias glanced at the old photo. Age does that, no, she said. Coming home does. He did not answer. He did not need to. That evening, after Lily left and the sky turned lavender over the pines, Elias sat in the chair beside the stove. Ranger slept with his muzzle resting across Elias's old boots. The house was quiet, but it was not empty. Elias looked down at the dog he thought he had rescued from a final lonely chapter. Then he looked at the new photograph on the wall, at Lily's reluctant smile, at the open door behind them, at the proof that not every broken thing stayed broken. For years, Elias had believed he brought Ranger home, but as the firelight moved over the old German shepherd's silver face, he finally understood the gentler truth. Ranger had brought him home too. In the end, Elias and Ranger's story was never only about a retired Navy SEAL and his lost war dog. It was about the quiet wounds people carry after loss, the love they forget how to show, and the grace that sometimes finds them when they least expect it. Ranger came back into Elias's life like a small miracle sent at exactly the right time. Not loud, not perfect, not wrapped in glory, but old, tired, faithful, and still full of purpose. Maybe that is how God often works in our lives. He does not always send miracles in the way we imagine. Sometimes he sends them through an old friend, a second chance, a phone call in the storm, or a loyal dog who refuses to let a broken man stay lost. This story reminds us that love is not always proven by grand words. Sometimes love is shown by showing up, by staying through the storm, by answering the call, by holding a hand, by saying sorry before it is too late. Elias could not change the years he lost with his daughter, but he could choose to be present from that moment forward. And sometimes, that first step back is enough for healing to begin. In our own lives, we may all know someone who feels far away, even if they are still near. A parent, a child, an old friend, a neighbor, or even a part of ourselves we left behind during a painful season. This story asks us not to wait for the perfect moment to return. Make the call, knock on the door, say the words, offer forgiveness, accept help, let love find its way home. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who believes in loyalty, second chances, and the quiet miracles God still places along our path. Leave a comment and tell us which part of Elias and Ranger's journey moved you the most. And if you enjoy stories about faith, courage, animals, and the healing power of love, please subscribe to the channel so we can continue bringing you more stories like this. May God bless you, your family, and every loyal heart still searching for the way home.